Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome to this, my build of the brand newly tooled Airfix 48 scale Westland Lysander. I was super pleased when I saw the announcement by Airfix that they were going to bring a brand newly tooled kit of this aircraft to the market. It is such a cool aeroplane, and I wanted to get a build in the books, as it were, straight away. And I'm going to do this straight from the box. I'm not going to add anything except a little bit of effort here and there where it may be required by myself. And that's mostly because I'm quite sure that at some point Airfix will release the special operations executive versions with the night camo, and I will more than likely get a second kit and put a bit of effort and detail and what have you into that build. So the intent for this series is for it to be compact. I don't wish for this to extend to 10 or 7 or 6 episodes. It's a lot of work for me to do that, and it's quite a lot of work for you all to watch it. I know some of you will, but you know. So the plan is for 2 episodes. The first will detail the build as per, and the second will detail the painting, weathering and finishing. So without further ado, I'm going to open this box and get on, and I'll pop back in at pertinent points to share what I find out along the way with you all. Well, here you join me sometime later, and no, the interior is not finished. It's not even close actually. I have a nice brew in a topical mug, nice cup of tea. It's been very warm of late, and today suddenly it's really cold again, so I'm feeling it, hence a nice hot cup of tea. Anyway, what's been going on? This interior, the talking point of this build has to be this interior. Now the fuselage halves, as you can see, I've two-toned them. The metal areas are interior green, and the inside of the fabric covered areas I've just done in a desert sand, desert yellow sort of colour. You can go all over the place with the internal areas of a fabric covered fuselage. You could go much paler than this, sort of a buff tone, and you can even go for a sort of a pinkish salmonish sort of colours, because the first paint after the shrinking dope on these was usually a sort of a red lead type paint, which would soak through to some extent and just sort of dye the internal areas a sort of a pinkish colour. So really the choice is yours. However, whatever you choose to paint the insides with, it doesn't really show very much when you're looking into the interior. This is the basic framework. It's not that basic. It's quite simple to put together though, and this is how it looks all put together. And this is not glued. This is all just sitting together. If I disassemble it now, it all kind of just plugs and slots together really beautifully. There's one side panel, the top deck. So I did already glue this left side part into position. I like to put things together into the sort of most complete form that it's still possible for me to paint them at, and that's where I ended up with this. So point to note with construction, this fuel tank, I spent a little bit of time cleaning it up very carefully and addressing the seams from where it was put together, only to find that now it is in situ, those seams would be minimally visible even now, and later on there's a map table and all kinds of stuff that goes over the top of this. So the moral of that story is don't worry too much about cleaning up that fuel tank. And other than that, I've just put it together as per the instruction leaflet, but there is so much more to come. I have in this tray, I think all of the internal parts that will be required, and this obviously is the very forward part of the fuselage, and I have to take this much stuff off the sprue just so that I can get everything painted in sort of one hit or very close to it. That's why I work this way. It could lead to some confusion if you're not careful, because there's so much going on here, but I have sort of put this together and taken it apart quite a number of times along the way. It's the forward bulkhead or firewall. This is the roof. This part sits around the front part of the cockpit, chart table. This one fits, they sit down here in the back. And there's a control column. These are yet to be painted but will be. That is the fuel filler neck. The pilot's seat, I have selected the version without seat belts because you do have two different backrests in the kit, one with moulded in belts and one without. I've gone without. A couple of, I'm not sure what these are, but they fit onto that. These are vents which fit into the fuselage parts of the front here. Instrument panel itself, armrest for the pilot's seat and some ammo cans. That is a lot of internal parts, and thus far they do all fit together immaculately, absolutely perfect. I haven't had any issues at all. There are still a few more bits to go in here that I haven't taken out yet. I'm still sort of trying to work through the instructions and identify all of the pieces that are needed for the interior before I can get the fuselage halves together. And bearing in mind that it is step 34 when the fuselage halves are placed together, you might get some understanding that there is quite a lot going on, and you will probably get to a point where you're going to want to just actually do some painting, put some of it together and then continue to add parts. Because if you try to do what I've been doing a little bit and have everything painted and ready to assemble in one hit, there is the risk of quite a lot of confusion because there are just so many parts going into this. But everything's gone together beautifully so far. All of the parts are moulded fairly well. I did have to take quite a long time cleaning mould seams off these frameworks, but in reality the visibility when put together like this and then sandwiched into the fuselage halves is such that most of that time was, to be honest, wasted. Now I have actually bought a small aftermarket set to go into this. I wasn't going to bother, but I saw it at a friend's house, decided to get it, so I've picked up this Quinta 3D decal interior set to just pretty up all the control panels and things. And that set also includes a 3D printed machine gun and the parts that are pertinent to it. So that's going to be a nice little upgrade, and it will save me a fair bit of time and effort going forward with all of this. So I'm going to carry on putting stuff together and painting it, and I'll be back when it seems relevant. A pertinent point has arrived. I have completed the interior of this kit and it is an absolute gem. Okay, so I already showed you the Quinta set. Here it all is together. So the paints used here throughout, this interior green colour is one of my own making. I base it on Tamiya XF71, and to that I add an amount, maybe, I don't know, 30% or so, maybe as much as 50% of XF21, which is RAF Sky. And sometimes there's a bit of white in there as well, but essentially that is the mixture to create this colour. And here it is. This is a quite wonderful interior. I'm perfectly sure more detail could be added, but I'm also equally sure that this is absolutely enough. It's very, very, very good, and I think that the Quinta set is a worthy addition. It just adds a little bit to it. All of the black areas on this are actually quite a dark grey, and it does work. I think the seat belts may be a tiny bit overly colourful, but that will help them to be seen after all said and done. So to finalise the interior, I just have to add the other side. I left it off to make it a little easier for viewing purposes, but as you can see, It just clips together without any messing around whatsoever, and that is our completed internal part. It is absolutely brilliant. The only thing the kit really was missing was a set of harnesses. The moulded in ones are okay, but they're only shoulder straps, and there's nothing included for the observer either. So this little Quinter set, and in all fairness, an Edward zoom set would do the same thing. It's just elevated the whole thing just to a really super nice level. I've added the vents to the internal area, as you can see there, the silver part, and that is also going to be very vaguely visible on the completed model, maybe on a good day with a flashlight. So there you go, that's how it all nestles in there. And I'll just add the other fuselage half quickly just to show that all snaps together. Absolutely no problems with fit, the top or the bottom. Absolutely beautiful job from Airfix, and equally a spectacular little set from Quinter. And we still haven't looked at the gun yet, but that will come later. Now, in addition to the interior green colour, I sprayed the whole thing, then it was coated with X22 clear, as is my wont. My X22 is thin from the get-go with 50-50 or 100%, whichever way you want to look at it, Mr. Colour thinner, because I put a 10mm jar of X22 into this olden days 23mm jar, and then I fill the 10mm jar back up with Mr. Colour thinner, shake it to get all the residual clear out, because, you know, money pinching, and tip that into here. So this starts life at 1:1 with Mr. Colour thinner, and then depending what I'm doing, I'll thin it down more. For this purpose I don't thin it anymore, just one nice coat, gives the parts a nice sheen without them being shiny, and it allows the paint to take a wash and everything a little bit more easily. Talking of wash, I have used this. Apologies UK viewers, it is quite difficult for us to get here, but it is worth the effort to get hold of it. That is Tamiya panel line accent colour, and I used dark brown. There's also just in the back here, in the observer's seat, because observers are always messy little pups, a little bit of the rust colour from this Weathering Master Set B just brushed in there for a bit of dirtiness. And I dry brushed after the wash that using Abteiling oil straight out of the tube, and just rubbed off on some paper towel. And I use this one, which is Abteiling 180 Copper Oxide Blue. Why blue, you might reasonably wonder? Well, because it's pale enough to highlight the details, but it's also a complementary colour, so it can highlight the details without giving that effect that you get often with dry brushing, where everything looks washed out and there's too much of it all over the place and you can basically see it. I don't like that, and I find that using a complementary hue avoids that to some extent. So these parts have been dry brushed with the aforementioned blue, and here is the result. Absolutely stellar stuff, and probably way better than any of us would have expected of Airfix even just a few years ago. Well, at this point the main construction is pretty much done. So here, the fuselage, I have added the top part of the undercarriage legs. These are not yet sanded down, but as can be very easily seen, they do fit exceptionally well to the fuselage without any effort on my part. I just plugged them in. So the bottom part was integral with this belly plate, and as you can see, that also, I have not filled or sanded that in any way. That is literally as it came out. These are integral with this plate, and then the top is a half that fits on. No issues. I will need to address the seams, but that's to be expected. I have fitted the rudder, again no issues, and if I hopefully, there we go, that is the seam all sorted on the top of the fuselage, and here the underside. This plate here is also separate, and as you can see, that has been let in, and again absolutely no filling or sanding has taken place. That is perfectly fine. And then at the front here, this upper decking part here wasn't perfect, so the gap you can see in the front, I deliberately trimmed it down some because it wasn't a big problem, but it didn't quite just seem to want to sit right. So in case it was just interfering at the front here, which it felt like it was, I clearanced that some, and then I fitted it as best I could. It has been fitted with super glue, and then I just sanded across the joint to get the to get it to sit level. I've removed in the process some of these fasteners, but they're all going to go anyway. I will be replacing all of these with embedded detail, which is more, to me, more prototypical. So that's the main fuselage part, and then you have the wings, which are really beautifully done. So this one is complete, and I have gone for slats retracted and flaps up. I guess most people are going to build this with the flaps down and the slats out just because you can. I'm not particularly interested in that. I want it to look nice. As to whether or not they should be open on the ground, there are plenty of photographs in the photo archive that I'm using alongside the build showing slats and flaps deployed in various. You can see straight away the flaps are down a little bit on that aircraft there, but equally they're clearly not on some of these others, and I've just showed you a page where they all pretty much are. The slats question is a different one. So here you go, this photograph here, this French one, you can clearly see that there are slats on the outboard and inboard section of the wing. They're two separate slats, and there's the flaps again, somewhat retracted. And I wasn't really sure on this because the kit has no provision for deployed outboard slats. So I looked into it a bit. I'm not a Lysander expert, so I didn't know off the top of my head. But it turns out that the two slats are independent of each other. The inboard slats are linked to the flaps, and all three surfaces are automatic. The pilot has no control over them other than to lock the flaps in the down position once they are already down. They work off of airspeed, or air pressure if you like, from airspeed, and the setup is that the inboard slats will deploy first and bring the flaps down with them, and as the airspeed decays, the outboard slats will deploy as well. I'm not sure on the retraction process because clearly a lot of them have retracted slats on the ground, so I don't know whether that's a matter of ground crew having to push them back in, or whether they can be whether they get automatically stowed with no airspeed. I don't honestly know, but the fact is that it is perfectly legitimate for the inboard slats to be deployed with the outboard slats retracted. But please, if you're going to have the inboard slats open, make sure that you do droop the flaps as well, because as I say, they're linked and work in tandem. But either way, I decided to represent them in the fully stowed positions. The kit does allow you to do it either way. So here, this is the two halves joined together bare, and the seam situation is frankly brilliant. So the seam here runs alongside the inside of this aperture. There's a tiny bit here which needs to be dealt with. The entirety of this leading edge, the seam is actually underneath, and it is this panel line here, and on both of my wings that requires zero effort. That looks like another panel line, it's perfectly fine. And then for the trailing edges, the seam runs along the inside of these control surface apertures, so the only other part of seam that needs to be dealt with is around the wingtip. Really superb work from Airfix there. So you can fit deployed slats, and this is a setup for that. I've glued the two parts together. You get a little insert and then the slat itself, and that pops in there like that. to give you a deployed slat, complete with the gap for the airflow and everything else. Very, very nice. The retracted slat, as you can see here, looks like that. And then the flap surface, here it is, has moulded on tabs, and you just slot it in, and it gives you what I would imagine is a fully extended flap to go with your fully extended leading edge slat, like so. The Lysander did have an exceptionally low stall speed, and it was a fully stall capable aircraft. It was actually, despite its looks, aerodynamically quite advanced, and the stall speed of the aircraft was only 65 knots, which is really slow. So this one is yet to be cleaned up and finished, as you can see, but this is how it will look. And as another point to note, there is a mould seam on the extreme leading edge here. Nothing major, but remember to clean that up, and it really is no more than a little bit of a gentle scrape with your scalpel like that, and then just run down it with a sanding sponge, and that's that cleaned up. It's as quick and easy as that. Tail planes all cleaned up. These slot together like so, and the tail planes on the Lysander are an all moving, it's a trimmable tail plane, and when you fit them you just interlock them through the fuselage like that, and they'll actually move. I did make a small modification here in that I thinned down this cover plate on the inboard end. That's how I've left mine, and this is how it comes. It's a much thicker as the two together. I did this using the number 15 blade, just carefully, gradually, literally trimming down like so, which is very hard for me to do with my hands up in the air like this, but just trimming down like that, and then releasing by pushing in that way, gently, patiently, just thinned down what's already there. You could, if you wanted to, make a whole new one out of thin plastic card or spare photo etch, but I've just thinned what was already there. And then the undercarriage, the lower part, the spats, these are made out of 3 pieces each. There's an internal sort of wheel arch, and then the two halves go together. No dramas. The seam on the inside runs just around the edge there on the inside. That's been sanded up and rescribed. This little piece, don't know what it is truthfully, this little piece here needs to stay on my aircraft, and I've drilled it for machine gun apertures, which the kit provides a little triangular notch that you clear out before joining together, which gives you an area to drill to. And when fitted to the rest of the undercarriage leg, it's a nice positive fit, and again there's not going to be any real work needed there. In this small box, which cost 69p from Temu, I have most of the other parts that are of interest at this point. The little fairings for the undercarriage. I get it. Oh, how's that for luck? I've picked up the right one. These are optional, they don't have to be fitted. And even on my model aircraft, which the instruction shows these fitted, photographs show that they get fitted and removed on a regular basis, just as the stub wings do. So it's pretty much up to the model what they do, but that is how that part fits. Very good, and again no filling will be required there. Canopies are in here. I've made the wheels and tyres. Some of this canopy arrangement will be fitted before paint, and other parts won't be, but I will check in before the end of this video so that you can see exactly what is fitted and what isn't before paint. So the next part of assembly for me and final part actually is to build the engine assembly itself. Now I've mocked up the engine using tape and blue tack. Here are the instructions detailing the way Airfix want it put together, which it works quite well. I took the liberty of joining E2 and E4 initially. Those are glued together already because I want to paint them all sort of slightly separately to give me a chance to do a bit of detail painting. But I've mocked it up so I could see where and how everything fits together and look at what may or may not need to be finessed or upgraded. And here it is, just held together with some tape. So despite the 3-part cowling, which I know some modellers are going to look at and think, oh, why did they do that? They kind of have to because of these bumps. Even just with some tape, a la quick snip, that is going together really quite nicely even at this stage, so I've got no issues. I think this is going to build together just fine. But I'm going to show you the bits that I am going to address and already have in some instances. So get that off, that is just blue tacked. So this is E2 and E4 joined together. All of these parts are essentially just black, but I'm going to dry brush the cylinders fairly comprehensively, the cylinders here, whereas I don't want to comprehensively dry brush this part, so that's why I want these pieces separate to enable painting. So now then, if I just disassemble the tape together cowling, and there are 2 points to note here. This is the cowl flap assembly, and I've opted for the closed type, as I generally do, because I want to preserve the lines of the aircraft essentially. Same reason I have gone with the closed slats and raised flaps. And what I've done here is I've used the pointed scalpel and I've just carefully run around the inside and basically put a shallow taper onto this entire part in order to thin the trailing edge quite significantly, which it looks alright like that, but you can kind of still see the thickness, but when it's fitted to the model you can't, it just looks nice and thin. For reference, this is more how it was from the box. In fact, it looked thicker than that, honestly. It's a subtle difference, but for the sake of a couple of minutes work, sort of it adds a level of visual finesse to the whole thing. Whoops. So that's that. This is the exhaust ring, the very front of the engine. So there are 3 parts here. There's this outlet duct here, and then the inner part is glued to the outer part, which is nice. These tubes attach to the moulded stubs on here, so when it's all together it works like that, which is great. However, it's not correct because just on the inside here you see this sort of step, effectively that shouldn't be there. It's supposed to look like this. There is indeed a sort of almost a flange, I suppose, at the very front of it, but basically it's just a continuous curve on the inside, much as it is on the outside. So that really wants to be addressed. And we can also see here the other main big thing I'm going to do, which is to hollow out these intakes. Here are the kit parts for those intakes. So as you can see, are moulded as a solid part, so they'll be hollowed out. The exhaust pipe has a slight indent in the end, that will be hollowed out properly and cleaned up. The carburettor intake's a bit problematic because it's got these slats across the front of it with a joint seam straight up the middle, so I'll have to figure that out. I'll look at some photos and come up with something there. And then lastly, this front portion of the engine, on my example, the 3rd rod is missing. I'm not sure if it was short shot or if it snapped off at some point in transit, but it's not there. So I will replace that with a piece of rod. That's no big drama at all. And whilst I'm at it, and this will happen after some of the engine has already been painted, I'll add the struts. There's a kind of a V strut arrangement on each one of those bars. I will add that as well with some fine brass wire probably. There does come a point with this where you have to commit to assembling the thing together. Once these cowl parts are together, you can't really get the engine in there because of the various tapers and bits. So essentially you've got to paint it and build it up and commit to it. So that's what I'm going to do, and as a final part of this build video, I'll come back to you when the engine's all done and I've got the wheel pants added and the final little bits of cleanup done for a wash up on this section of the series. Just quickly then, before I put some paint on and hide what I've done, here's our front part of the engine. Just a little piece of plastic rod added to replace the missing one. Don't worry about these chunks on the end, they're just location devices. They fit into the divots in the back of this here, the 3 places, and it cannot be seen from the front that this leg doesn't have one. The exhaust ring itself, I have added, so it's actually Tamiya epoxy putty, there we go, that's this stuff. Comes in 2 parts. I always put it in some separate ziplock bags once I get it open, just to try and keep as much air as possible off these. You don't use this a lot or all the time, and the edges of it will tend to harden up over time if you don't try and keep it somewhat airtight. So Tamiya epoxy putty. There are other things along these lines available, notably milliput and green stuff. They'll do the same job. Mix a little bit of that up, and then using a cocktail stick, once it's made, put some in there, and using the stick I just kind of roll it in, smooth it off, and once it's all in there, sort of press it in, wipe off the excess. Once it's in there, you can dampen the stick and sort of smooth it all out really quite well. And then once it's hardened off, I just used a fine sanding stick just to smooth it all out a little bit. So that has sorted that one out. The exhaust itself, cut away, hollowed out the end, smoothed off all the joins, and then I've added some stretch sprue around the outlet and in the 2 places that had this little web. It should be flat, but that's a decent enough approximation in the scale. Here's the rod. This is just evergreen or similar plastic round plastic rod, and used that to make the stretch sprue rather than actual sprue. Not least partly because it's white, so it's easier to see. Here, the 2 intakes, these are actually for the oil coolers, hollowed right out. These are very thin metal on the original, so you want a nice thin edge on those. And the air intake itself, again, hollowed it out, cut away the detail, and added 2 slats from my thinnest plastic mold, which I believe is around about 5 thou in thickness. I think there's supposed to be a vertical rod in the centre of this as well, but I struggled to find any really clear photos, and I'm happy to accept that that is definite improvement over the kit part, and it will do me. So just wanted to quickly show you those before I go ahead. I'm going to start painting some of these because I'm going to have to assemble this together, these parts for this sort of power egg, because the seam lines need to be dealt with on the cowling parts, so that I can attach the whole thing temporarily probably to the front here to get the camo to align. I've also fitted the actual wheel housings, painted the interior parts interior green. Don't think they'll really be seen, but it stops it from being bare plastic. These did fit very well. I've just got a little bit, just a touch of the Vallejo acrylic putty in that one side, which was wiped out with a cotton bud. And there we are, construction complete and ready for paint finally. And I say finally because getting all these clear parts fitted and blended and masked took absolutely ages. There's such a lot going on this model. The Lysander is a deceptively complex aircraft in many ways, but the transparencies are just on another level. Full disclosure, the wings are not actually fully ready. I am waiting for superglue to dry. So here is a wingtip lamp lens. I don't know if you can see, I feel there's a little divot in the back of each one of these, which I filled with clear paint of the appropriate colour. This is the right hand wing, and as such the lamp is green, so I've put a little bit of clear green paint in there. I painted the receptacle just silver with an AK Real Colours marker, and then use super glue to glue it on, and then I've put super glue over it, which I will sand back to fair it in. Let's pop this out of the way. Here's the left one with its red bulb. There are some windows in the wing roots of this particular version. Those are glued in. I've masked the outside with bare metal foil, and then I've masked the inside with Tamiya tape, because I do not need to have the wings on the model to apply paint. It's going to be done as you see it here. So there's the wings. Struts are fine, tail planes are fine. These you can stick together, pull them apart, whichever way around. So most of the work is here. Obviously I finished up the engine, painted it. It's all just black. A little bit of a dry brush with some gunmetal-y sort of greyish silver. Assembled it all up and then fitted the whole thing. I have used super glue to assemble the cowl pieces and completely abolished the seams. So there was one here and the other one was there. Those are not joints on the real aircraft as far as I can tell. I don't have any plans to hand. I believe there should be two details that are like, this is the joint detail here. I believe there should be another one like that, but I'm not 100% sure where it's supposed to go, so I've just filled them. There's a bit of a step here, but again I'm not too worried about that, and this has been glued onto the fuselage with ultra glue. It is a permanent joint. Looking at it from this angle, you can see how much thinner the back of that cowl flap is and how much more refined it looks as a result. I thought about masking it and attaching it in a non-permanent manner, but you really cannot see in there, so I didn't bother. Fitted the actual wheel housings onto the undercarriage leg stubs there, no big dramas, and the wheel covers are temporarily held in with tape, and that's all taped out. I painted the inside silver over the top of the interior green, and then I've just roughly masked that. There's an ident lamp in the belly that was fitted and faired in with super glue and has been masked with a high Q pre-cut circle mask. The windows back here are held in with ultra glue again, hopefully permanently masked with bare metal foil, and the mass the mass of transparencies up here. The main glazing, that upper part which fits this way around on the real thing and it slides back to open, this has been kept separate because fitting it will impede painting some of the other parts, so that's taped down to a stick to be painted separately. The windscreen is permanently fitted. I used a touch of super glue on each side, and then the middle part I've just run this gloss varnish into, and that has filled in the very slight gap that it had, and it's stuck as well as it needs to be. The rest of this is all temporarily held in place with bits of tape, bits of blue tack, and masking fluid. It's not, if I pulled hard enough this would all fall off, and all has been masked, as you can see, with bare metal foil, and that did take roughly an afternoon to get all of that squared away. Quite a lot of work in that. But here we are, it is ready to paint, as you see it here. Oh, I forgot the landing lights. I fitted the actual sort of light piece inside, then I fitted the covers again. I fitted them with super glue and faired them in with super glue, sanded it, polished it back, and these are masked with high Q pre-cut masking circles as well. There we go. Now I'm not lying, that's it, ready to paint. So that does bring us to the end of part 1, the building phase of this kit. And it's been an absolute pleasure from start to finish to put this thing together. It is very, very good work on Airfix's part. No fit issues really to speak of whatsoever. Very, very little filling and sanding. Well, in fairness, there's not really any filling. Obviously you have to sand seams to get rid of them, but there's no extra filler in any of it. The only part of is this tiny little bit of filet putty here, which is not really worth mentioning. An absolute pleasure. It's very well detailed. It all goes together like clockwork, but there's just enough work left in it to make you, the modeler, feel like you're having an input on things. So brilliant stuff from Airfix. Can't recommend it enough, and fabulously enjoyable kit to build. So thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been useful. And with all of that said, it only remains for me to say, until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.